considering to vote yes or no on the Charter Commission's plan to reduce the City Council from 24 to 12 members, all elected citywide, with no board-elected councilors. There's also a plan, controversial, in its earliest stages, but supported by a majority of the incumbent city councilors, that would reduce the council to 16 members, half at large, half elected by the ward. If the proposed charter revision is rejected by voters on November 7th, election day, would you support, as a city councilor moving forward, with the home rule petition proposal for a 16-member council, now sitting in limbo in the Programs and Services Committee? And this is going on the assumption that this carries over to the next term, but that we have a rejected Charter Commission proposal, and still probably many councilors saying that, okay, we agree, we concede, 24 is too many. Why don't we start with Julia?
See if I can pass the mic test. What I like about that alternative is that it would provide head-to-head elections in all races. So instead of voting for 2 out of 3, you'd be voting for in a specific race at large. My concern with the plan to reduce to 16 is that I would want to know where the workload that is currently being done by the existing committees with 24 members, and typically I think most councilors are on 2 kind of big committees and maybe a third if they're on property reviews. I want to know where that work was going to be done. Would it be reallocated to a smaller number of committees? It's possible some committees could meet less often, but I would want land use decisions to remain with the council. I would, since it seems like most people in the city support a smaller council, I would probably vote to put it on the ballot.
Okay. So we're going to go about a minute for your answers. Councilor COTE.
Thank you. So that's an excellent question. I think what I get the basics of the questions are, do you think this is a serious commitment to do this or not? And I think if you go looking at the existing situation, the city's going to turn over a mayor, its council president, council vice president, 5 or 6 senior city councilors, half the school committee, various administrative positions. There's going to be a huge turnover. So should the charter be accepted, we're going to have additional work to do. Should it be rejected, we now have to face the issue that we put on the table. And I'm, in full disclosure, I'm one of the city council that supported the home rule petition option for the residents. The reason why we did that was to show that it's a new council now. So whatever happened in the past, I'm going into my 3rd term, should I be elected? And I think it's important to note that there's a consensus on the council to actually make this happen this time. It wasn't there before. And I know it's 14 city councils signed on to this. However, there was 2 or 3 others that reject any change in the city council. So there's actually a lot of support for a home rule petition.
Okay. Andrea?
At this time, I would not support that. I think that as we look at the 18 months worth of work that the Charter Commission did to come up with the current proposal, there was so much background and examination and research, and this home rule petition hasn't undergone nearly enough vetting for me to commit to the direction I would vote on that.
Right, this would be, I'm just saying, would you support something like that? Whether it would obviously be negotiated, but this is under the assumption that the no side prevails on election.
No, I understand that. I think it's way too early for me, or actually I think none of us should jump on board that until a lot more work has been done to bring that up to speed and to look into all of the effects that would entail. So no, I wouldn't now, yet. Thank you.
Fair enough. All right, I'm going to move on to another subject. And we'll start with you, Andrea, this time. Mixed-use development. Affordable housing, there continue to be hot-button issues here. I would say the most divisive issue, aside from the charter that we're going through now. Over the past few years, we've seen the City Council approve special permits for mixed-use, affordable housing development on Austin Street, a much larger project on Washington Street, both in Newtonville. Northland's also announced its intentions for a massive redevelopment of its Needham and Oak Streets property, which is the Marshalls Plaza and the former Clark Shoes behind it. The question is, how great is the need for more multi-unit and affordable housing here? And how should it be blended with commercial and retail development within a mixed-use zone? Or have we done too much already?
I think that when the Board of Aldermen, now City Council, created and approved the mixed-use 4 zone, they were forward-thinking to trying to meet the needs of both Newton and the region, metropolitan Boston. And no, I do not believe that we have met the housing needs that we have right here in our city or in the greater area. I don't think that without some of these larger mixed-use, mixed commercial residential districts that will be able to accommodate the housing that is needed. Luckily, there are only a few sites, I would say probably, I'm guessing a handful, that are appropriate for this kind of development. No one is suggesting that these go onto residential streets. So near village centers, near transportation, near commercial, I think we need to continue to look at these.
Julia?
Okay. I think actually that MU4 was a mistake. I'd like to see it repealed. I think it's cannibalizing commercial property when we use it in places like village centers that are currently business use. You say there's very few sites, but there are actually many properties along Washington Street that are being targeted for multi-use acquisition. Even the parts of Washington Street that are in between village centers, they are people's residences, as are areas abutting the proposed MU4 districts. I think it threatens our some of the things we love about Newton and our villages. I mean, think about, if West Newton Cinema, are you willing to lose that? Because nothing is safe, everything is expendable if the incentive is there for a developer to build 4 or 5
All right,
structures.
we're going to get back. We're going to follow up on this question as well. But first, I want to hear Councilor Cote's first.
Thank you, Andy. I think it's appropriate to sit between the two viewpoints because, in full disclosure, I am on the Land Use Committee. The Land Use Committee is one of the more complex committees on the City Council. They're all complex in their own way, but it's very complex in what we do. So my position has been very fair to work on both sides of the issue and say, where do we find this appropriate and where is it not appropriate? So my basic background has been that I've looked at the village centers, any existing footprints, that I would have not a big problem going with existing footprints depending on the situation. But we are looking, since the Washington Place approval, to look at defining the areas where MU4 would be appropriate. So, my position is I go by the project when it comes in. We look at the basis of it. I'd rather see more low-income housing. That's been my big push for the last 4 years. I don't see the affordable thing, but we're not really addressing the low-income housing, and that's the area that we have to actually concentrate on.
All right, I wanted to follow up on this a minute or so. You were mentioning, Andrea, that there were just a handful of sites. We've all heard the consideration, maybe the Triangle in Newton Center is somewhere that could be. What were those sites that you were thinking of, and that I want to get Councilor Cote and Julia's responses to your?
According to the criteria that are already set forth by the City Council that need to be met, pretty objective criteria, having access to public transportation or multiple nodes of transit is one of the things that needs to be met. And so that means really it needs to be close to a commuter rail station, Green Line, or the buses. Close to services and amenities that benefit residents. That implies village centers that have shopping, schools, senior center.
So is it Newton Center, Newton High?
Newton Center, well, we've already seen Newtonville, which was started
Right.
early because it had those things. Waben, possibly. We've had a proposal or two come forward that did not go forward there, but I think in terms of siting, that's probably one. Because most of Newton is not walkable to those services and amenities and public transit. I haven't listed that handful, but when I think about village center transit-oriented services, I don't think that there are a lot.
Okay.
Thank you. So when you look at the locations, we have 3 major areas that are up right now. When you look at Riverside, the Northland property, and then you go over to the Marriott, which is not up for anything at the moment, but is another potential site. But we also have 3 commute corridors, really. If you look at 128 as being one for newer people, Route 95. Then you have also the T line, the green line that goes through, and then we have the commuter. The ideal world would be flipped over, the green line would run down where the commuter line is right now, because that's where the actual capacity could be. So we have to look at it, where would we put additional housing and such like that, and I think once we define better, like, so the village centers, once we define where we can do that, we have to work in conjunction with how do we actually move the people to work. While we've been playing around with this issue, a strange thing has happened. Waltham, Needham, and a few others have built a lot of commercial properties along Route 128. So now, not only are people moving to Newton to work downtown, they're looking at the west also.
Julia.
Right. Well, it's one thing to say you're on a transit line, and it's another to actually have the transit. The green line is very useful. It runs, in my experience, about every 8 or 10 minutes when I want to go to Logan. But the so-called transit on the Washington Street corridor, consisting of the commuter rail, it's good if you're commuting to Boston at normal commuting hours. It's not good if you're going in the other direction or outward to Framingham or trying to get to a Route 495 area. So it's not justifiable. It doesn't meet the criteria in practice of the MU4. I'd also like to address the question of affordable housing, which I didn't get to on part one. The city's own housing consultant has said we won't build our way to affordable housing with more volume of units. What we'll do is make it less affordable for people to live here as we drive up the cost of city services.
We're going to stay in a slightly different track, but the same subject, with a focus on the south side. As I mentioned, Needham Street, Oak Street, Northland's plans to do something massive at the Marshalls Plaza and behind it, Clark's Shoes, former headquarters. Early on, Northland said, what was it, 990 apartments? It was a lot, plus retail and commercial. With a docket item and some specifics expected by, I guess, early next year is what I hear. What do you think is the appropriate blend of commercial and residential development in that place, which does not have public transportation, unlike Newtonville or Newton Center or the Highlands or Riverside? Roughly, and I know this is a difficult question, but do you have a comfort level with how many apartments could go there or what the mix should be of residential and commercial there? Go ahead, Julie.
Okay, well, my preference, given the very low percentage of property in Newton that is commercial and business, would be to have it as a maximum commercial space, a corporate headquarters, room enough for a company that needs a big space. I don't think a large volume of residential units should be constructed there at all unless the developer is willing to build a new school, a school that would be walkable for the people in Upper Falls who haven't had a neighborhood school. That would be, I think, a bottom line requirement that any city council should require for a large residential development there.
Okay. Jim?
Thank you. I think we have to look at this from multiple angles. So in my public safety and transportation hat, we've approved shuttles that run back and forth through the city, and they pick up people from Cambridge, from the various T-stops, and they bring them to places like in Needham, in Waltham and such. And I think we have to look at, if we're building a project of that size, and looking at commercial, possibly retail and housing, that we need the housing, we need affordable housing for the workforce that would accompany that. So I'm on land use, so that's my second part of this. I'm on land use committee, and we are addressing that. It won't be done, like you're correct, it won't be done until the new year because it's such a complex issue. But there has to be a good balance for that because of traffic issues. Until the state comes down with the actual, what they're going to do with the Needham Street, Highland corridor, we actually don't have a good handle on what we can actually put in there for volume and adding capacity. So we have to be careful of that. And I understand the folks up here are worried about the capacity into the neighborhood.
Andrea?
I wish there was a magic formula that would tell us what's the right percentage of commercial, retail, and residential to make things be successful, but there's not. However, in that site, which is huge, it's 30 plus acres, I think first floor retail, above it commercial office space, and a mix of residential for all different income levels makes sense. I think the numbers right now sound astonishing. I think they're down to 850 residential units. I expect that might get lowered as the project moves forward, as it probably should. They're aiming really for workforce housing, millennials, and downsizing seniors there to kind of Julia's point about school enrollment. Those are the needs that they're addressing, and I think we need to bring in workers and employees to fill the jobs, and that's the kind of housing that they're aiming to do there. Again, I don't know the number, but I think that we've seen with Austin Street and Washington Place how the process helps make the project better, and we're going to have a long process on this one.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, we're going to stay on housing, but we're going to go to the flip side of the coin. We're going to talk about single-family homes, which is another big issue here and has been for years. Specifically, their price and their size, which are both enormous. Okay, my question is, what role should zoning reform play in controlling the size of new single-family homes, if at all, and the dwindling supply of older, smaller, less expensive homes? And start with Councilor Cote.
That's a good question because I've had some conversations already with some of the developers about their proposed projects that we're hearing about on the street. If we circle back a little bit 3 years ago to when the Rose Street proposal was coming up, which was to put 150 units in a block building over in the West Newton, Auburndale side, we came in with a unique proposal. I took the lead on that and grabbed a few other city councilors with me, and we came in with some proposals to put smaller houses in on smaller lots that would be deeded forever to be small enough that the price would never get out of control. So I still am focused on trying to get a development of that nature to go somewhere. There's a few spots now that I've been mentioning with developers, so we're looking at the more older traditional size houses, maybe in the 1,500 to 2,000 square foot range, smaller lots, made in such a way and designed and contracted they can't expand, they can't add additions, that they would stay in that price range by just market forces. So that's the goal of what I'm looking to do going forward.
Julia Maliki?
Okay, well, this is an issue I care a lot about because I live in a neighborhood of, capes and bungalows and an old bungalow myself. I think zoning reform, to date, it seems to be focused on how to get more density in village centers. I don't think that's what people want. I think everyone is worried about tear downs, and I think zoning reform should focus on disincentivizing tear downs. I think we need to, not just have stricter FAR and revert perhaps to the larger setbacks. 7.5 feet from a property line is pretty small. Stricter dimensional requirements would help disincentivize tear downs. I think we also need something like a volume measure to avoid the problem of attics that are 1 inch too short to count in FAR. And we need to, I would also like to perhaps have a housing trust fund or something to purchase smaller homes before the developers get them, put a deed restriction on them, and then keep them in that size.
We can tell this is an issue that means a lot.
I think everyone in this room might agree on this issue, that losing the smaller homes to tear downs and the mega mansions, and also, as Jim mentioned, the creation of smaller units is something we might all be in favor of. So there's a commonality. I have hope that zoning reform, rather than just focusing on increasing density in village centers, will also be looking at residential neighborhoods and single and two-family homes. I believe that context-based zoning and using the pattern book are ways that we can help guide appropriate development within neighborhoods where you're considering the context and not tearing something small down and putting up a big thing.
Let's start with a question from Julia to Councilor Cote. You're normally a great advocate for residents, so I was very disappointed in your vote for Washington Place, the Orr Block rezoning with a quote-unquote devil strip that made Robert Korf his own abutter and circumvented the right of the real abutters, and I believe that was Foster Street, to require a 3/4 majority, putting the burden on regular people to go to court to exercise their rights under state law. Would you do that again, which is support that strip that negated the necessary 18 votes and brought it down to a normal 16 vote, 2/3 rather than 3/4?
Okay. Test. Okay, so I think when you look at that question, you try to micro it down to a little small portion of the project. So I'm on the land use committee, and we spent just about 2 years working on that project. So the project that came in and the project that came out is quite different. And I think if you look at a viewpoint, like if I have one of my colleagues here, opponent colleague, whatever we call each other at this point, one is pro-development, building these kind of projects, the other is opposed to it. I think my position has been very clear in the city council that I've been fairly checking out and working carefully to craft these projects to fit in. So if you look at the Washington Place, so we didn't look at it necessarily and micro it down to that so-called devil strip that has been named, but the fact that how does the project work and how does the project fit into the neighborhood and does it satisfy the needs of the city?
Okay.
So that is the perspective we took. To take each plot separate would be too
All
challenging.
right, you're going to get it. Let me go ahead. I have a question from, you're in the crossfire again, James. This is from Andrea to you. In what committee would you seek to serve on? Why do you feel
Andy,
that?
that's-
Oh, I'm sorry. This is from Councilor Cote to Andrea. What committee would you want to serve on? Usually it's two yeah. So what do you think is the best fit? Land use, programs and services, public safety. What do you think?
As the newbie, I'm pretty sure I will serve wherever the president puts me. However, given my background as a landscape architect and my interest in zoning, land use, and housing issues, I would love to be on the land use committee and also on zoning and planning. But I have to say I'm interested in public facilities. I'm a multi-issue person. A lot that goes on here in Newton intrigues me, and I'll happily go wherever they want, but I put in my hat, although my Ward 3 colleague is on land use, so I'm pretty sure he'll end up staying there.
All right, I'm going to move on to an audience question, and we'll start with Julia and we'll go down the line. How do you feel about an appointed body deciding special permits? I think what this question is saying is that if we have a 12-member city council, they're not going to be able to handle land use. And there have been calls to have an appointed planning commission that would make decisions on more land use decisions rather than the city council, as it does all of them now. How do you feel about that?
I would be against that. I know we're always hearing that land use decisions are quasi-judicial and they're not supposed to be influenced by residents, but in practice, you need to hear from residents to understand the implications. There's not supposed to be negative effects of when a special permit is granted. And I think putting the power of that on an appointed board essentially gives the power to the mayor, because the mayor is doing all the appointees. Your only chance to change the mayor is every 4 years. That's pretty hard to unseat an incumbent, as we've seen. And I think it's better to have a more diverse and more publicly accountable body doing those decisions.
Let's go to Andrea. And I would just add, I don't think by definition it would have to be just the mayor. You could have the council appoint some as well, I would think. But it would be appointed nonetheless. Go ahead, Andrea.
Right now, the city council, through the land use committee and the full council, does a wide array of special permits. I think that some of the less complicated ones could be handled by an appointed body, such as zoning and planning. I mean, the Planning and Development Board, or the Zoning Board of Appeals, ZBA. I think the larger, more complex projects, as we've seen, like Washington Place, things like that should go through the full council for that thorough vetting. There are even some simpler things that perhaps planning department staff could help make recommendations on, that if it's about a simple porch setback, something like that. I think the council ends up taking up a lot of time on matters that it doesn't need to do.
Okay. Councilor Cote?
So that's a tricky question when you get to politics, because what you're looking at is you're taking away the voice of the people on a project to turn it over to what you hope would be an administrative body that would take care of them. So I pretty much could echo a lot of what Andrea said, that on land use, we deal with a myriad of requests all the time. Some of them are so simple and so basic that basically the planning department already makes a decision, we get it. And I wouldn't say we rubber stamp it because we review everything carefully, but it's a given that it would be approved. So I think a lot of those could be handled in planning, some committee offshoot. I think if we reduce the size of the city council, we will have to add administrative staff, because there's a lot of things that we're going to be adding some cost that we don't have today, because of the fact that we would have to handle these things. But when you get to something that's going to affect the population as a whole, and possibly the future of the way things are done in the city, At that point, you're best left in the political process because they answer to the people.
Okay. All right, we have one more question, and this is from Andrea to Julia Maliki. How can Newton achieve its goal of supplying 100% clean energy through municipal aggregation, shared solar energy or whatever?
Right, or
So,
wind
yeah,
power,
renewable,
solar.
yeah.
Right. When it comes to solar power, you might be referring to my objection to cutting down the trees at the library to put up solar panels. I do think solar is a good thing to have. I'm happy to see solar panels on so many roofs across the city. I think we should not be depriving people of trees where trees can be planted to put up solar. I think we should think bigger. I think we should work with Mass DOT to use that median down the Mass Pike and the south-facing wall on the north side of the Pike to put a huge array of solar panels that would be a much larger source of anything that we could do in spots here and there. There's potential for wind power, but I know noise is an issue. We talked about that at the sustainable zoning session the other night at the library, and noise is a concern, but I think there's this potential for other means of power too.
All right, Sally has informed me I can have one more question.
No. Ward 1 is next.
Ward 1 is next. I did not have one more question for the candidates, but I wanted to thank them all. This is for Ward 3 at large, incumbent COTE. There have been a few high-profile votes in City Council the past few years relative to control of residents' behavior. We banned supermarket-style plastic bags. We restricted the use of leaf blowers. There was even a crackdown on drones, which a federal court recently ruled was a bit of an overreach. The question is, have we gone far enough with this type of regulation? Some would say we've gone too far already. Or are there additional local regulations that need to be pursued by the City Council? We'll start with Councilor Ciccone.
Thank you. I'm in a place right now where I'm looking at yes and no, okay? I look at it as, yes, there is a lot of things that we can be looking towards regulating in the city, but on the other hand, are we doing a little too much? I think we're going a little bit overboard right now. I think right now we have to concentrate on the things that are more important. The roads, the schools, public safety, those sort of things that really should be addressed with the City Council at a local level.
Councilor Leary.
Thank you to the area councils for inviting me to this and all our colleagues. I think this is a great event and it gives me the opportunity to see this beautiful school, which I haven't been in before. So getting to the question, one of the reasons why I got involved in local politics is because climate change issues kept me up at night. And I saw that there was a lot of opportunity to be effective at the local level. And I think there is a role for city government to work on issues that residents care about. And frankly, they care about things like quality of life. They want to be able to have a barbecue in their backyard on a nice summer day without interruption. They care about their environment. We need to get out of, stop being a throwaway society. We need to remember that all our actions have long-term consequences and we can't externalize those costs onto the environment. So I think in regards with plastic bags, that's just one part of a much larger solution towards reducing the amount of things we're throwing away, recycling more. So it's part of a much larger plan for me.
Nicole Castillo.
So I think I'm still open to it, and I would want to take each proposal as they come forward. I think for me, as a young person, climate change is the most pressing issue of my generation, and I can see that there may be regulations that would have to be put forward to put us in a better place. So I would want to take it on a case-by-case basis, but I'm open to it.
Janet.
I want to thank everybody. This is a great place. I haven't been in Asia before either. So I absolutely believe that we have to stop over-regulating the lives of our citizens. I think that we need to be more involved in local issues, not issues that need to be addressed at a corporate level, whether it's with the companies that manufacture plastic bags or leaf blowers, and maybe those need to be addressed. They are issues, but I don't believe that you need to overregulate the individuals in the city to get those goals. I would like to see more attention paid to our incredible amount of property taxes that have gone up considerably more.
All right. We can get to that.
Okay.
We'll get to that question.
Oh, okay. So stop overregulating. That's my answer.
All right. We're going to move on to another question, and we'll certainly talk about the O word at some point in this forum.
Not that word.
This is a question that I borrowed from my friend Margie Aarons Barron. She asked the candidates for alderman 2 years ago, and I thought it was a really good one. And I think this takes on even more meaning now that we're considering eliminating the ward councilors. How do you weigh the opinions of your constituents? In this case, it would be the entire city, but also considering the ward that you reside in, with your own strongly held beliefs. Is there a time you would have, or that you would theoretically do what you think is right, but that it may not be popular? Councilor Ciccone, go ahead.
I've been in these positions already. I've stood by myself on many occasions because of, it's my values, but it's also the values of my neighborhood. I grew up, I've been in the same neighborhood for a very, very long time, okay? I think everybody in that neighborhood understands that I grew up in a police officer's house. I became a police officer. So there's rules to everything, okay? And I was taught that at a very young age. So in looking at things and me being biased in some ways, yes, I am, but I also know that the decisions I make isn't just me thinking that way. There's a lot of other people that think the same way as well.
Okay. Nicole, why don't you go ahead?
So a lot of folks might know that my background is in advocacy. And so that work meant that I worked one-on-one with my clients. I heard all their concerns, and then I helped them to move through systems respecting their opinions. So I didn't steer their opinions. I listened to them deeply and then helped them to understand the options that were available to them. And so I see the same role that I would play as city councilor in hearing all of the concerns that the neighbors have. I also don't presume to know that I understand everything that everyone is facing. The only way that I actually can discern that information is through talking to people and hearing their perspective. I think there are certain issues, like for example, public safety, where I would take action. I wouldn't want to be held responsible for something that I knew was going to place people in danger and that might be against the public opinion. So in those cases, I would follow my moral compass.
Thank you. Councilor Leary.
Thank you. So I have the tremendous respect for the opinions, the thoughts of my constituents and all Newton residents, and I spend a lot of time listening to them. And you know that we have a lot of public hearings, a lot of people have opinions, and I can tell you that I'm sure that I agree with everyone in this room on at least some things, and I disagree with you on others as well. I always try to find areas of agreement, and I sometimes struggle with my votes, and I think some of my colleagues know that. I'm struggling right now in Newton Corner with the Sunrise development, which is proposed there for the Clay building. We have competing needs, and we have to balance needs for the whole city and mitigate any impacts on neighbors. And I do my best to do that. And I use my final judgment to make that decision.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on to another question. This is the O word I was talking about, which is override. Oh, I'm sorry. My bad.
It's okay.
Janet, no, please do. I'm sorry.
Just to clarify, you want to know if I would be outspoken on something that was disagreeable to other people that I felt strongly about? Is that what
You
you're
would never
asking?
do that.
I'd never do that, ever. If anybody knows me, they know I have very strong opinions, and I also am very outspoken, and sometimes to the degree that it's unpopular. But you know where you stand with me. There's no question about it. There's no hidden agenda. I do want to say that, as Allison mentioned, the Sunrise development, that's directly in my neighborhood, and I'm extremely concerned about it because the feedback I keep getting from neighbors, the people that I know very well, is that the city needs to pay very close attention to what's important to them and not the profit model being shown by the proposed builder. And I really think that you got to put the citizens or the taxpayers first. That's just how I see things.
Okay, well, let's stick on this then, because that is something I think that's expected to come up for a vote next week, which is the Sunrise. It's basically a senior assisted living type facility. It's right on the corner. It's on Washington Street, right where the car dealership was. Yeah. We'll let Councilor Leary. I mean, this is not the same type of debate that would involve a Washington Place or even an Austin Street. I don't imagine that there are going to be, a lot of cars from residents coming in and out of there. There are some concerns about the height. Tell us about some of the difficulties you've had and how you're going to make your decision, because I guess maybe Tuesday?
Well, it's coming before land use on Tuesday. So there's no question that there's a need for this kind of housing in Newton. I mean, people, we're getting older and we need assisted living, and it's filling an important need. The question for me was, it made me think more of, we need to do more village planning, because we already have Benchmark on the other side of the highway, which is another senior living. And I'm not, my druthers, I probably wouldn't choose to have two senior living centers so close together, maybe a restaurant or mixed use, but that's not before us. So I'm looking at how we can mitigate the building. It's going to appear as a 3.5-story building. We move the service entrance off Hubby Street, which is the small side street, onto Washington Street. We push the massing of the building up onto Washington Street. We're keeping a green space perpetually open, which would certainly act as a buffer. It's also public park. There's also going to be 3 free units. So all in all, I think it's a good project.
Janet, I know you've had concerns about this, and this is in your part of the
Well, I happen
city.
to agree that I think it's a great project for a number of reasons. Number one, I think it's a great project because there's a need for assisted living, as Allison said, and there's just a definite strong need for it. So I think that's a given. It'll be taxed as a commercial property, which I think is something that's beneficial to us because we definitely need that tax revenue, a continued tax revenue like we're getting from Clay. The concern I have is that the neighbors, and these are the people that their backyards, you talk about enjoying things, their Sunday afternoons, they don't want to hear the HVAC going 24/7 from this building because it's so close to their backyard. So to me, that's different than leaf blowers, which come and go. This is going to be going 24/7. So I have a lot of respect for the neighbors and what they want, and this is their investment. The largest investment they'll probably make in their lives is their home. So to me, that's what takes precedence.
Councilor Ciccone?
Okay, I'm struggling with it too. Allison and I have sat through numerous meetings with the developer as well as the neighborhood, and both sides have been making consensus. They have been working, I thought at one time very well with each other, but then it seemed like the tides turned a little bit. We get better projects when there's community involvement, okay? When people sit down and they talk with these developers, this developer in particular came up and said the project that he first put forward wasn't as good as the project that he has today, okay? So these consensus and the things that people are putting in, working together, I think they're very close, okay? The developer dropped the roof line, he's done, moved the dumpsters, moved the deliveries, and that park that they're going to maintain, okay? It is a private park that's going to be for the public, okay? Dawn to dusk, it'll be open, they're going to take it, and it's going to be deed restricted. They said they were deed restricted, so it'll be a park there forever. I think that's very important.
All right.
That's part of that buffer zone.
Nicole? Castillo?
I've also met with the developer, and I think that they've been doing a pretty good job of listening and hearing the feedback from the neighbors. And one of the things that I very strongly believe is that we need to make sure that there are housing options for seniors, and we are so far from really meeting that. For me, it's a moral issue. We cannot be the type of community that doesn't have places for our older folks. And what I really like about this development is that it's near the city centers. It's, if someone had their mother or father there, they're in close proximity. And that's the type of quality of life that I think everyone deserves here in Newton.
Okay. Now we will move on to the question I was alluding to earlier with the word being override. We had one successfully in 2013. We had a failed one in 2008. I like to say that as liberal as Newton is, it's not easy to get a Proposition 2.5 override. I think there are, correct me if I'm wrong, 2 that have been approved here since it went into effect in 1982. But several schools are overcrowded, in rough shape. The senior center is not state-of-the-art, nor is the police station. How, as a city councilor, would each of you weigh the need for a Proposition 2.5 override or a debt exclusion, which is not a permanent increase, but it comes off the books eventually after 25 or 30 years? How would you weigh this need and the cost against the financial impact it would have on many in the city? Let's start with Janet Sterman.
I'm going to come at you with a couple of facts that I got from my friends at the Newton Taxpayers Association, which I believe is the only entity that exists in Newton that's truly looking out for the taxpayer relative to your pocket. That the last override actually passed with only 17.5% of the vote, which is unbelievable. So 17.5% of the voters made a decision for 100% of the taxpayers. Now, since 2000, the city expenditures have gone up 93% per household, where the household income has gone up 32%. The tax that the city's taking from each household has come up 82%, and the annual income per household has gone up 32%. I think it's egregious to ask anybody to pay a property tax override when we cannot control our spending.
All right. Councilor Leary.
So as you know, we all are from Ward 1, which is a very diverse ward, and I'm very sensitive to the needs of our moderate and lower income residents. So if I was looking at a tax override, first of all, one of my goals for the next session, if I'm fortunate enough to be reelected, would be to look at expanding our commercial tax base, figuring out if we can do something about payments in lieu of taxes for some of our larger nonprofits. It's difficult to put the burden, as Janet says, on some people that really are struggling to stay in Newton as it is, and we say we're committed to them, right? So I'm 15 seconds, boy, time goes by quickly. But I will say, okay, I will say that I think the last override was a good investment. I mean, we're building new schools on time, under budget, and I think most people would agree that it was a good investment in our community.
Go ahead, Nicole.
I think I also would like to increase the commercial tax base so that we could look at other ways of having tax beyond homeowners. But there may be cases where we would need an override, and I would want to make sure that there are tax programs to support veterans and older folks who are on fixed incomes. I think I would support an override in cases of infrastructure, for example, the senior center, which we direly need. And this, already the budget for seniors is minuscule. I think it was 0.15%. So I think that it's not something that we absolutely want to do, but we need to be conscious that to actually be able to provide the services to our community, we may have to look at it.
Councilor Ciccone, how do you weigh the merits versus the impact on residents who may not be that well off?
It's a difficult question because, you know, we still have our programs and services, our key programs and services we still have to maintain. I'm not necessarily looking towards overrides for our operating budget. I just don't think that, I think we should work within our means. But when it comes to, debt exclusions and that sort of thing, I look at each one on an individual basis. How is it going to really affect the people of the city in the pocket? On top of, you got to look on the other side. What are we getting for our money? So there's two different, different flip on the coin of that in both sides. My biggest concern is holding on to our key programs and services. We lose that, we've lost Newton.
Why don't we go a little bit, I know that a few of you had some things to add, and Councilor Leary, you had something more to add on this, or let me throw something out there. Would you support an override that included, for example, major renovations of the senior center, or perhaps a new location for the senior center? Is that something that you think is legitimately, would be a good thing to include in an override?
So I would have to look at something for a very specific purpose, and I'm totally committed to seeing something done with the senior center. I think it's a huge need, and I've had a number of people talk to me about that. So yes, I would consider an override specifically for improvements or a new senior center in some other location.
Janet, go ahead.
Well, as somebody who is definitively handicapped, which is different than where I was 10 years ago when I first ran for office, is I'm somebody who takes advantages of the services provided by the senior center. But I do also have to mention that I do agree that the senior center is inadequate to the population it serves, but I also believe that we have to pay attention to our voracious spending habits. It's unconscionable that our household incomes went up 1/3 of the amount that our spending is. I mean, our spending is out of control. Somebody has to pay attention to the spending before, they're going to actually ask for the override before they pay any attention to the spending. I know that.
All right.
But
Counselor,
the spending's out of control.
Counselor,
That's my same answer.
Councilor Ciccone, and I'll add a new police station too, deference to your experience. But those are the two municipal buildings, aside from 3 elementary schools, Countryside, and a couple of others that would probably need to be subject to a debt exclusion or override. But would you consider the addition of a senior center or a police station, which is not very modernized?
No, I sat through, believe it or not, the police department has been accredited since I've been chairman of the Public Safety and Transportation Committee. I've met with the accreditation people, and that was the one thing that they said. Everything's perfect in this police department except for the building. The facility is just not appropriate. It's getting older. There was a bunch of things that we talked about. It was on the CIP way down low. It's up to, I think, about 37, now, on the CIP. It's something that they're looking at. I personally think that we should be looking long and hard at if we can actually afford to be able to build this without a debt exclusion override or any kind of an override, to be honest with you. Okay, there's ways that we can look for grants, just like we do at schools, and see exactly what we can prove. I would say that as far as overrides go, that would be my last option.
All right, Nicole.
So yes, I'm a strong supporter of the new senior center. I think it's so important. One of the best things about the senior center could be connecting seniors to a host of other services that are available, but folks just don't know how to apply for. So I think it's really important there. And I also really like the idea of looking at other types of grants, capital campaigns, but realistically, we may need a much stronger investment, and I think an override would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you for your honesty. Let's move on to the questions from candidates to each other. So this question is from Janet Sturman to Nicole Castillo. As someone who has lived in Newton for a couple years, 2-3 years, what knowledge of city operations can you address, given your opponents here have 30-plus years, and I think it's, in the case of Allison and Jay, it's even more than that. How can you, this newcomer to our city that we love so much, say, oh, I'm ready to be a leader?
Sure. So I came to Newton in 2013 to work at Newton Wellesley Hospital, and I worked as a domestic and sexual violence advocate. I worked with a host of community-based programs, so I understand what citizens need and what it looks like to actually go through systems here. So I offer that experience, and I also work as a public policy director, so I work in state and federal issues. So while I don't have experience working, on the Newton City Council, I also have experience working in the government. And I think the other piece that I would offer is that we're always talking about the new folks that are going to come to Newton. And I think my experience is not meant to supplant the years of experience that the folks here have, but to offer something in addition and to really take responsibility for the community that I'm making my home in. And I think that will offer a well balance.
Thank you. All right, I have a question from Nicole to Councilor Ciccone. What can be done to support more diversity and inclusiveness in Newton?
Diversity, inclusiveness. Are you talking about housing? Well, as far as the housing part of it goes, and I think this was it may be the platform that we're going from here on in. We have right now in place 15% affordable housing when these new buildings go up 4 or more units. Now, looking at Washington Place, I've sat down with that developer on numerous occasions, and I said to him, we're always looking at, the market rate up here and low-income housing down here, but what about the people in the middle? The school teachers are starting out, police officers, firefighters, that sort of thing, and people in the private sector as well. And I said to him, I really stressed to this developer that this middle-of-the-road place is where we should really be, setting our sights on. It just so happens he came back and he told me 10% affordable housing.
Right, so for the police and the teachers and the firefighters.
And even people in the private sector just starting out, kids getting out of school, they still have their, tuition that they still have to pay for years upon end. We have to have a balance in that so those people can still stay in the city.
Got it. Next question. This is from Councilor Leary to Janet Sturman. What role, if any, does city government have in providing affordable housing?
Well, I think the role is relative to the 40B laws that are being put upon us by the state and how we approve the projects that are coming to us that are asking for our approval at the Land Use Committee. I don't believe we should be making the investment in building housing because I think we have so many other priorities as a city, as our spending, and providing affordable housing is, I think, at the very low tier, if any tier, for the city expenditures, especially considering our humongous OPEB debt and our insatiable taste for spending.
All right, I have a question from Councilor Ciccone to Councilor Leary. Do you feel if the charter revision is approved that ward representation will be compromised?
So if the charter is approved, will ward representation be compromised? I don't believe so. As a ward councilor right now, running at large, I don't see how I would look at things any differently or represent Ward 1 less effectively than I'm doing now. I think it's critically important that we listen to all voices, but we're also a city, and we need to work together as a city. So I think that all in all, the charter has a lot of very positive elements to it. So I did struggle with the model a little bit, but all in all, I thought it was it's made some very good changes to our charter. And I will continue to operate the way I have as a ward councilor, which is to be an effective voice for everyone in Ward 1, but also looking that we're part of a larger city.
Okay, thank you. I have time for a couple of questions that were submitted by members of the audience. Why don't we start with Councilor Leary, and we'll move right down. This relates to a question that I asked earlier, but this is more specific. How would you better enforce the current newly passed leaf blower ordinance, which I imagine is going to require some enforcement in the next several weeks?
How would we better enforce the current leaf blower? With education and outreach. I think it's very much like, almost like a anti-smoking campaign. People have to understand the issues. That the landscapers and workers need to know the rules, and I don't think we've done a very good job with that. We didn't work cohesively as a city with the executive committee when we passed this. But I'm convinced that's a process that will work out. I've already seen an improvement since it's gone into effect.
Okay, Nicole?
I would agree. I think we need more of an opportunity to just general education. When I entered the race, I actually didn't know a whole lot about all the issues that were at stake with the leaf blower ordinance, and I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with a number of folks about this. I also know that there's one idea that has been floated, which is to have one police officer who's only responsible for following up on those types of violations, so we're not utilizing our first responders. I think that would be more effective for both the residents, and would be a better use of time for our police.
Councilor Ciccone?
Well, and I think everybody's aware I was against the leaf blower ordinance from the very beginning. When you tell people that, you're gonna more or less take a piece of their livelihood that they feed their families with, it's like telling a doctor you can't have a stethoscope. Okay, that really concerned me. Okay, that everybody else moves ahead when progress and things happen and we get new technology. But on the other hand, now we're backing down on this. People are out there with jackhammers at 7 o'clock in the morning, but you're gonna ban a leaf blower. It just didn't make sense to me. I thought there should have been more dialogue with that, especially with the people that do operate them every day. As far as the enforcement part of it, I really don't see the police department being the people to do it. I mean, you're taking away police services on many other things for them to chase around leaf blowers and write reports on. I think if we talk to the chief, he's going to have, if not hundreds, thousands of reports regarding leaf blowers. I just don't think that's the right way to be using police officers' time.
Janet?
So, since Allison is an advocate for education, I have a question for her. Was it your idea to ask the mayor to put the most recent notice in the tax bills about the new leaf blower law for an educational?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead and answer the question.
So,
what she's referring to is that there was it explained the regulations. It was an insert in the quarterlies.
In the quarterly tax bill. Okay. So I will say this much, that I, like Jay, feel that this is extremely limiting to people who are longtime business and independent business people that make their living in Newton, that are taxpayers here, and they provide services for, I would say, the majority of our people that live here, because few people cut their own lawns. So as far as enforcing it goes, I'm really concerned about the potential for vigilantism, and I'm hearing that is happening in the city, where people are banding together and using texting, and they're going and call the police after this guy. This, to me, is totally one of the problems with this ordinance.
All right. We'll stay on this because I know it's controversial, and this thing is really going to heat up, I think, as the leaves start to fall here in the next couple of weeks. Councilor Leary, you were one of the leaders in terms of getting this ordinance passed. Are you concerned that it's going to, number one, as Councilor Ciccone has suggested, put too much of a burden on the police, who could be dealing with things other than someone making a complaint about leaf blowers, or people going around and calling the cops on their neighbors?
No, I don't think it's going to be a burden. Again, I think it's going to be a process of education and outreach and working together as a community on this. And I just want to clarify that all we did was enforce the noise ordinance. We made it easier to enforce the noise ordinance. when we made some of the changes. And we just asked that we not use the gasoline blowers in the summer when they're just blowing grass clippings. It's really not a big change because actually the law was being violated for 9 years. And we had a lot of people that were very passionate about this. I mean, it's almost like you can raise taxes easier. But when it comes to quality of life issues, people really care about it. So I think we need to make it work. And we do that through education, outreach, working with the police, working with ISD, figuring out what else we might need to do to get the word out. And it will get better. I think we've seen improvements already.
Councilor Ciccone?
There we go. I'm still going to stick to my guns on this one. I just don't see how police officers chasing around landscapers is an effective way to limit the use of leaf blowers. I just don't see that. I mean, the noise ordinance is one thing. If they're not following the noise ordinance, then absolutely. But to limit them and to start saying, well, you can do it during this season, but not that season. I mean, but like I said before, you know, you're taking a tool away that progress has brought forward, and they're still making progress on them too, which I hope someday that we can have even more, you know, powerful, quieter machines. Okay, I think they're leading more towards that way. The industry's telling the manufacturers, look, this is the way that we want to go, which is fine, but I don't think we should be limiting these people now because of that. If anything, we should be working with them and working with these manufacturers to get these leaf blowers down to the 65 dB or quieter so it doesn't bother the residents of the city.
Janet?
Well, as it pertains to the noise ordinance, I can't tell you the number of residents that have told me relative to this whole building surge that goes on with tear downs, the number of times that their neighbors are tearing down a house and at 7 o'clock in the morning, not only are they blocking their cars, but the noise from construction is unbearable. So, I mean, if we're going to be keeping a lid on our ordinances and noise ordinance, I think the noise that comes from construction is just as bad, if not worse. And there's no, I don't know if the decibels will apply to that too, but nobody's calling the cops on that I'm aware of.
Okay, and we'll wrap with Nicole Castillo.
So I think there will be a learning curve, just like there is any time you introduce something new. And I don't know like exactly how many hundreds, thousands, potentially reports, you said thousands, that there could be. So I can't speak to that. Or maybe not thousands, but what I can say is that the people that are involved on both sides, I think, have very good intentions. You know, the folks that are for the leaf blower ordinance, they care deeply about our environment. They care about the health of the landscapers. You know, and I think also I've sat with some of the landscapers, and I understand this is like a huge issue for them in terms of their livelihood. And so what I want to see is let's help them to be able to have the proper leaf blowers. You know, I think it's okay if they increase their prices, because I understand this is more of a burden on them, and it's okay for them to, you know, anytime we do something that's more green, it will cost more money, and I think that that's okay. But all I would say is that I think that if we have, you know, more just civil dialogue around this conversation, and so we're not, I guess, like fighting with the caricatures of each other.
All right. Thank you. I want to thank all of the candidates in Ward 1, City Councilor Alison Leary, City Councilor Jay Ciccone, Nicole Castillo, Janet Sturman. We could keep going, but we need to get people home for dinner, and we still have a couple of wards left. So thank you very much. I'm going to start with the question for all of you, and I think we have a diversity of opinions here, perhaps. That I started with the Ward 3 folks, which is the Charter Commission's plan to reduce City Council from 24 to 12 members, all elected citywide, with no ward-elected councilors. But there's also a plan in its earliest stage, but supported by a majority of incumbent city councilors now, that would reduce the council to 16 members, 8 at large, 8 elected by ward. If, and that's a big if, the proposed charter revision is rejected by voters on November 7th, Election Day, would you support moving forward with some type of home rule petition? It doesn't necessarily have to be that 8-8 alignment, but some type of home rule petition to reduce the size of the city council. And the question, I guess, in a nutshell is there a consensus forming that the city council is just too big, even with those who are adamantly in favor of maintaining the ward representation, the city councilors who are elected by the ward specifically for the interests of the ward? Well, let's start with Braden. Go ahead.
Okay, so I really do feel I've had a chance, obviously, to knock on a lot of doors this summer and talk to a lot of folks. The thing that I consistently hear is that folks want a smaller council, but they want to maintain local representation. And I think a compromise of an 8-8 city council makes a lot of sense to me. One of the things, right now, what's in front of the council is just shrinking the size of the council to 16, 8 at large, 8 local. Makes a lot of sense to me. I was actually advocating to take what the Charter Commission did. I actually like pretty much everything in that charter that they want to change, with the exception of reducing or eliminating the word counselors. I would advocate, if it were possible, for taking the commission's document, simply, and I did this already, simply taking out the 12 at large, putting in 8 and 8, and voting on that. That makes sense to me. Everyone gets what they need.
Councillor Auchincloss.
The fact that we are debating this particular question shows that this October surprise from the city councilor has already served its purpose, which is to muddy the waters ahead of the election on November 7th. The Charter Commission spent 18 months with considerable public deliberation, considerable careful analysis to put forward a document. It is the voters' choice on November 7th, yes or no, not the city council. We should stay out of the way, let the voters have their say. Now, if after November 7th...
This is based on the premise that no prevails.
Right, but that premise by its very self has now already confused the electorate, and that's very unfortunate, because it was not our place to insert ourselves. If after November 7th my colleagues had docketed an item to reduce the city council in a different way, I would have been open to that. And I may still be open to that, but we should not be talking about this in October. This subject is confusing enough. The voters deserve a clear binary distinction between yes or no.
Councillor Albright.
So first I want to apologize for what I'm wearing. This is what I wore to the hospital last night. I ended up in the ER and came directly from there, so I'm sorry I'm not dressed up for this. But the question was, would we support a home rule petition? A home rule petition would only address the size of the council, and it would leave off all of the other things that the Charter Commission worked so hard to propose. If the only thing left to us, if the charter proposal fails and the only thing left to us is a home rule petition, I think it's important enough to have that to reduce the size of the council. I think the 8-8 is not the way to go. People who are looking for democracy, right now, people can vote for 2/3 of the council. With the petition that has been filed, you can only vote for half of the council. And I think in terms of democracy, that certainly reduces the democracy. So yeah, we can look for another option, but the one that we've got probably isn't it.
All right, we'll move on from this. We'll start with Braden again. What's your position on allowing the retail sale of marijuana, in the aptly named, I would guess in that case, the Garden City? But it's not something that we're going to probably start to hear a lot about in the coming months as that deadline passes. Have you thought about this?
This is an interesting question, and honestly, I have not heard this once come up, but I'll definitely answer it. I'm not an advocate of recreational use of marijuana. I think there's obviously a lot of different issues here involved. I think, it's illegal at the federal level, it's legal, it's going to be, or pretty much is legal at the state level. So there's this really unclear situation as to what we can and can't do. So I will just kind of preface my answer with that. I'm not an advocate. I have 2 children. I have a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old. And I know that a lot of folks feel that marijuana is not that big of a deal. I just think for a lot of parents out there, it's just one more thing that a parent has to deal with. Easier access to marijuana, I don't think is a good thing. I do understand the other side of the argument, which is, it creates kind of a criminal class of folks that really aren't doing anything that's necessarily all that bad. But in my personal opinion, I just feel like easier access to marijuana is something that, as a parent, I'm just not an advocate of.
All right, thank you. Councilor Albright?
Thank you. So I had a constituent who wrote to me, a psychiatrist who has a group of folks that she's been working with. She's against the marijuana program. There is a city staff committee that's forming to deal with the new marijuana law, and on it is Greg Schwartz, who's a physician, and he's the council's member on the committee. I've been reading a lot about how other states are dealing with this, and they are finding some satisfactory ways to regulate it as we would liquor sales. So that if Newton decided not to have the sale of marijuana in Newton, we actually have to have a referendum on it, because we affirmatively passed that law here in Massachusetts, in Newton. So we have a long way to go in analyzing where this thing goes, and can we find a successful way to regulate it is the question.
Councilor Auchincloss?
Councilor Albright's correct. Because Newton voted, I think, about 55-45 in favor of decriminalizing, or rather legalizing marijuana, the city would have to have a petition in order to not sell it here. I would actually be in favor of that petition. I have a vision for walkable, vibrant village centers. Retail marijuana is not in harmony with that vision. I don't think it makes our villages better, and I would not support having marijuana sold here. I'm in favor of decriminalizing it. I don't really care if you want to smoke a marijuana cigarette in the privacy of your own home, but it doesn't need to be in our villages.
All right. Senior citizens are the fastest growing segment of our city, and I believe it's within the next 5 years or so, we're going to see maybe 1 out of 3 over the age of 60. Are we doing enough? We touched in earlier forums about the senior center being in an old library that's not the most state-of-the-art facility. Are we doing enough to meet this important and growing segment of our population's needs? Councilor Auchincloss.
No. The fastest growing demographic in Newton is the demographic of 80 years old and older. There's a whole host of services that they require that Newton, I think, is under providing. One of the most important things that we on the City Council can do, though, is to provide adequate housing for senior citizens, and that particularly means walkable, transit-oriented housing that allows them to perform or to fulfill basic amenities within walking distance of where they live. Some of the most articulate and eloquent advocates for Washington Place, for example, were senior citizens who had built their life here in Newton and wanted very much to downsize while staying within the network of their friends and family. That's why it's so important to provide housing here in the city that can support all income brackets and all ages, because people want to age in the community that they have built their life in.
Thank you. Councilor Albright.
So I agree with Jake. The answer to that is no, we are not doing enough. I door knocked on somebody's house who told me that they have jumping jacks in the gym classes at the senior center, and you're only allowed to raise your hand this far because otherwise you knock somebody. So the facility is not good enough. Our services are not good enough. And I had a very sad conversation with a woman on Mill Street whose husband is now ill, and she's looking for a place to go in Newton. The only places she can find are in Waltham and Watertown. And it's sad when people have to leave the city they love and their families grow up in. So for lots of reasons, we are not doing enough for our seniors.
Great.
Maybe, yeah, so I will agree with that as well. I think one of the things that when you talk about senior issues in Newton, I think the number one most critical issue is the housing situation. I've had a chance to talk to a lot of folks, especially on the north side of the city, that are on fixed incomes, have been living in their home. They may have bought it from 1960. They paid $30,000 for it, and now they're paying $10,000 a year in taxes on a fixed income. I think one of the things that we really, if we're serious about this, it's not about a whole series of high-end luxury units being dedicated to seniors and different areas. It's about seriously doing senior-oriented housing. If we're serious about it, put that in the villages. I think an opportunity was lost to put senior housing at the Austin Street place. Whether you like the project or not, I think that would have been a perfect opportunity to put 40, 50, 60, 70 units of senior-oriented housing right in the villages. That's what we need. Diversity of other units, fine, but it has to be senior housing.
Let's stay on that subject, because this is something you hear a lot, and we'll let you start, and then we'll give councilors Albright and Auchincloss a chance to respond. But you hear this a lot. Why can't you have affordable housing dedicated to senior citizens? Is there a way that you could see going about that? What would be your preferred mode of developing that? Would it be something that's done by the city or a public-private partnership, or simply to put out bids to a developer?
Yes, good questions. I mean, here's the way I look at this, and this is, I develop large renewable energy projects, so I'm very familiar with the development process and what goes into and what doesn't go into actually looking at a project and seeing whether it's viable or not. I think a couple things that we can do, because again, it's a cost-benefit analysis. If we're serious about it, what we might need to do is go and reduce the tax rate on those particular properties. So if the developer comes to Newton and says, I'd like to put 5 units over here in this part of a village, maybe in Wagon or something, wherever it may be, to say, listen, we want that. We're going to make that work for you. We're going to help lower your tax rate on that, so that maybe it's taxed as a commercial building, maybe it's taxed as a residential unit with a reduced rate of tax. That to me makes a lot of sense. That's one option. We talk also about accessory apartments to be able to help seniors do that. That's another thing that I think is critical. Trying to get a loan, trying to get a contractor, it's difficult at age 80. We need to help people.
Go ahead, Councillor Auchincloss, and then we'll complete with Susan.
I gotta say, I mean, we have developers beating down our door here in Newton to build. The idea of giving them tax breaks, which they don't need and haven't asked for, to build more makes zero sense to me, especially when we actually need to expand our tax base here in the city to pay for better services for seniors. So number one, no tax breaks for developers. Number two, though, I don't know why we're so focused on separating senior citizens from the rest of their community in their own housing blocks. Most seniors I talk to want to live with all age brackets. In fact, one of the most exciting parts of Washington Place, and also Sunrise, which is in that neighborhood, is that they get to be around all different incomes, all different ages, the whole community. I don't think they want to be balkanized. I think the best thing we can do for senior housing is to build housing, period.
Councillor Albright.
So we've already done a couple of things to facilitate senior housing, and Braden mentioned a couple of them. One was the accessory apartment ordinance, which helps seniors remain in their homes by generating some income from an apartment. The other thing we did was we recently, the reuse committee recently gave up the Stanton Avenue water tower, which is right next to the Golda Meir Center, and that will probably create, if Golda Meir is the winner, it will create additional housing units for the elderly. So those are things that we've already done, but on the other hand, I agree with Jake, the people that I've talked to the seniors do not want to be segregated into senior housing. They want to be with their community. They want to be with all incomes and all ages. So it's a combination of having to figure out how to do this mix, and also doing the things that we've already accomplished to keep seniors in their own homes.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Let's talk about mixed-use development, and we spoke about this with some of the other candidates from the other wards, but mixed use and affordable housing for seniors, for others, continues to be a pretty divisive issue in the city. We've seen the city council approve special permits for Austin Street. We've seen a much larger mixed-use development be approved for a special permit recently, Washington Place, right across Washington Street. We've talked a little bit here tonight about the really ambitious, not a specific proposal, but vision of Northland to redevelop that roughly 30-acre property sandwiched between Oak and Needham Streets behind the Marshalls. Here's the question is, how great is the need for more multi-unit and affordable housing here? Is there no need? And how can it be blended successfully with commercial and retail development within the mixed-use zone, the MU4 zone. Or have we done too much already, as some would say? Councilor Albright.
So the housing, the question is, what's the need? The need is huge. I think we're supposed to be developing something like 1,000 units a year, according to the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, and we've created maybe 24 units a year in the past several years. Something that I wrote in the tab not too long ago says that Newton can't be successful in developing more commercial or retail unless it has places for people to live. And I'm now talking not just about seniors and not just about people who are low income. I'm talking about workforce housing, middle income housing. So we need a diversity of housing types, and the need is huge. To even think about Amazon coming to this area without developing more middle income housing is crazy. But one thing I want to say is that I want to focus on bringing people together on this topic. Let's try and get all the sides to agree on what the facts are, and we're going to have a process for that.
All right, great.
I think one thing that I sometimes is lost in this discussion is the concept of balance. We talk about people, we need more housing, we need more affordable housing. That's definitely the case. But I also understand that there's a lot of people that live here already too, and there's a quality of life issue that must be balanced between both as part of this discussion. I think, when you talk about adding large, potentially 900 units down on Needham Street, I mean, where are those kids going to go to school? I mean, there is not a location for those kids to school. You're going to have to go to school. You're going to have to redistrict. You're going to have to move families all over the place to deal with that. You also talk about the traffic. We were a city that's been built out from like the 1820s, 1830s when the railroad first came out here. And we're locked in. We really don't have the ability to go with eminent domain and rip out a whole bunch of the houses, and we wouldn't want to do that. So I think there's a balance. When we talk about housing, senior housing, they see that folks that live here want to stay here. Let's get our heads around that and get that done. But this concept of large-scale urban development, I'm not a fan.
Jake.
One of the strengths of Newton's 13 village format is that we actually can have the best of both worlds. We can have mixed use development in village centers that creates housing, but then the neighborhoods, single family, two family zoned, with green space, can remain bucolic and can remain lower density, and they should. And zoning redesign phase 2 is going to operationalize this. We're going to see 13 vibrant villages where you can walk, have a safe, comfortable, interesting, useful experience in your village center, but then you go to your neighborhood and it remains green. And my basic philosophy about development is, in Newton, we have so much underdeveloped land near transit that there is no need to build on any green space in this city whatsoever. I will not support any development on green space in Newton, and I've already made that clear to would-be developers. So it's quite binary.
All right, we're gonna go with a follow-up. We're gonna let Braden follow that, and then Jake and Susan, go ahead. You were shaking your head about something. So.
Yeah, I mean, the concept that Newton has significant amounts of developable land left is it's just not the case. I mean, I think a lot of folks in this room are politically active and may have seen that video that was released shortly a week or so ago by one of the developers. The concept of taking Washington Street and building it up. Guess what? There are people living in apartments right now on that same block, all the way down from West Newton to Newton Corner. Where are those people going to go? What are we going to do? We're talking about shrinking the roads. We have a 2-lane going both ways, and we're going to have 1 lane going both ways. We're going to double our density in that area, and we're not going to have a traffic impact. That's just not reality. We talk about public transportation, but the problem is we're on the low end of the totem pole with the MBTA. We are not a community like maybe Everett or Stoughton that needs these transportation modes to get people literally to their job. If they don't have the transportation, they don't have a job. We're not their priority. They won't just advocate for us.
Thank you, Braden. Susan, and then Jake. And we'll move on after that.
Let's see, where to start. With respect to transportation, I think that one place where we are okay with the MBTA is that we need to get people out of their cars and onto transit, or the traffic problems in Greater Boston are going to be horrible. So they are working with us. They are looking at fixing the Auburndale station, and they are looking at a 2-track solution so that both stations can be used in West Newton and with Newtonville. And this is crucial not just for any developments along Washington Street, but it's crucial for the whole city. The other thing I want to say is that we're not going to take any developer's plan and build upon it and use it. We need, as we talk often in the city council, we need some master planning along our commercial corridors and our residential villages. And without master planning, we don't know what we should be doing, and we're certainly not going to start with any developer's vision of Newton.
Councillor Auchincloss.
One thing in Newton is that regardless of the issue, there's probably an expert nearby. We have 2 Nobel laureates in the last year, and we also have Jeff Speck, who lives next door in Brookline, who's a world-renowned urban planning expert with a particular focus on walkability. He's put forward his vision of a Washington corridor that is on a road diet, that does have more mixed-use development along it. And I think it's a vision of positive change that we can make a reality together. What we've heard articulated from our challenger is a resistance to change in any form. Change is coming. We need to embrace it. We need to work together to make sure it's the kind of change that we want. But simply saying no is not going to get Newton forward in the 21st century.
All right, thank you. The other side of the residential housing issue is the single-family homes, the size of the replacements, the dwindling supply of the smaller homes, which are less expensive, although I don't know if you could call an $800,000 ranch house on the south side affordable. But you know, this is an issue. What about zoning reform, and where do you think that goes in terms of perhaps limiting the size of some of the newer homes? I know of, you know, in neighborhood after neighborhood where one neighbor stops speaking to another because the neighbor built by right, by the way, a big home on the existing foundation and blocked his neighbor's view of the stream. This is an issue in Newton. How should zoning reform address this affordability? Character of the neighborhood is often referred to. Where do we go with this? Go ahead, Braden.
I think there's a lot of things that we could do, and I think of a few things right out of the gate. I think the first thing we should be doing is tweaking a lot of the things related to the FAR, the area coverage of the lots, the setbacks. So disincentivize people, developers specifically, from coming in, taking a 1,000 square foot house, tearing it down, and just because they can't build a 5,000 square foot house, doing that. We have to say, and maybe we'd add something which I think might be beneficial as well, percent increase. So for instance, even though you might be able to go to 5,000, if you have a 1,000 square foot house, maybe you can only double the size or add 50%, whatever the number may be. That to me makes a lot of sense because it keeps the house in line with the neighborhood. And to speak to this specifically from my own experience, we bought a house about a year ago, 2,800 square foot house. Based on our lot size, we torn that down, put up a 4,600 square foot house. Instead, we chose to preserve it. We're going to redo it, and it's going to stay the same size. It's completely in character with the size of with other houses in the neighborhood.
All right. Councillor Auchincloss.
That plan put forward would dramatically reduce the value of lots owned by many senior citizens in this city and thereby really damage their resale value. So I would not be in favor of that. We have to be very cognizant of the fact that most senior citizens' biggest asset is their home, and the ability to resell it for fair market value is going to provide their nest egg. And so I don't want to unilaterally as a city really take away value from that lot. So not appropriate to me. However, Newton absolutely has an affordability problem. The median price of a home is $1.1 million. I did a side-by-side comparison with Watertown, for example, a couple months ago. We don't have a middle class as a city anymore to a large extent. We priced it out because of that home value. So we need to do more with zoning redesign to help rebalance that. Right now our zoning code incentivizes the exact wrong behavior. We want to encourage housing near transit while discouraging overbuilding on lots in the neighborhoods. And we can do that with a form-based code with zoning redesign.
Thank you. Councillor Albright.
So I'm glad you didn't call these little houses naturally affordable, because the house around the corner from me that sold at $750, a small little bungalow, is hardly naturally affordable. I had a new perspective on this last week when I was canvassing in Woburn, when I was learning that large houses were being torn down and larger houses were being built. And nobody was happy about that either. I don't know if you guys are aware of the pattern book that's just been finished back in late spring. It's actually, if you can find it online, it's in the planning department. Have a look at it because they're accepting changes through November. It went through every single neighborhood in this city and described it. Large lots, large houses, small lots, small houses. Every single neighborhood was described. And the challenge to us is, can we build a zoning code around sort of form-based zoning to make sure that the neighborhoods don't lose their character as things change over. So please do have a look at the pattern book and make your comments about it soon.
Thank you, Councilor Albright. Newton is a great city. We love it. Beautiful homes, as we're talking about. Some new homes, some 100-year-old homes. Really good schools. It's safe, but we're not perfect. We'll start with Councilor Auchincloss. What's our biggest weakness as a city?
I think our biggest weakness as a city is our unparalleled healthcare liability that we have in our books. And I know that's not a very kind of politically exciting answer, but I look at $700 million of unfunded post-employment healthcare benefits that plague Newton, and that frankly plague many of our neighbors in Massachusetts. And I think about the kind of taxes that are going to be required in the future to pay that down if we don't address it now, and the trade-offs that we're going to have to make in city services to pay that down responsibly, and it's enough to keep you up at night. We need to get this on a trajectory where we can pay it down responsibly. And until we do that, I think our future as a city is frankly in doubt.
Right? Biggest weakness?
Well, I think Jake and I may not agree on a lot of stuff, but I think he hit the nail on the head with that. I mean, we're at a point where we have basically it's $1 billion between the two, the pension and the healthcare. And that's a lot of money. I mean, even for Newton, that's a lot of money. And I think we start to get to a point where we start to, as you said, start to curtail services, curtail different things that we want to do, raise taxes to deal with this, and it's only going to get worse. We're lucky right now in the sense that interest rates are relatively low, but that may not always be the case. Historical lows now may not always be the case. So I do think that is our biggest weakness right now, that right now, because of the economy, everything seems to be on a relatively sound footing, but if anything goes wrong, the economy turns again, that's a significant amount of money, and we're going to have to figure out a way to pay it.
Thank you.
So I understand where my two colleagues are coming from, but I think that our current mayor has put us on a path, and I think it'll be up to whoever the next mayor is to make sure that that path is the right path, and I think that will be handled. I have a slightly different perspective, and it's something that the League of Women Voters voter guide started me thinking about. It's all the partisanship, not only in the country, but right here in Newton. And I wish to, and I want to, and I think we must find a way to bring ourselves together. Those of you who have read the book Getting to Yes know that there are ways to find a way for us to agree on what the facts are, what's our vision of Newton, what are our interests, what are our mutual interests, and how can we move forward together instead of constantly battling on every single topic. And if we can work on that together, there's no telling where we can go.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I'm going to move on to some questions, candidate to candidate. This first is from Councilor Albright to Braden Houston. When weighing the costs, excuse me, I've done this a second time. From Braden to Councilor Albright, when weighing the costs and benefits of a high-density housing project, which metrics do you consider, and how do you fiscally justify the costs of the projects with the gains? So what's the balance that you seek to achieve, to determine?
So, of course, there's the issue of studying the project and making sure that it's a revenue positive project for our city. But I also want to look to the Natural Resources Defense Council's criteria for a LEED neighborhood project. And that gives us some sense of, does the density warrant in such a way that it will increase the environmental, reduce the greenhouse emissions, so that they have a whole set of standards. You guys should have a look at them. They're terrific for judging a neighborhood project. So the revenue, the environment, and is it a pedestrian, does it enhance the pedestrian activation of the neighborhood and the village center? Does it bring a critical mass of shoppers to the businesses so that they can grow and thrive? All of those things have to be considered.
Okay. Next is a question from Councillor Auchincloss to Braden Houston. Would you vote in favor of Sunrise Senior Living, which we've touched upon during the Ward 1 forum, which is offering 100 plus units for senior housing, and it's really it's assisted living, that type of project, as it's currently configured, which is, I believe it's 4 stories, but it's going to give the appearance to the neighbors of being about 3.5 stories. So this is from Jake to Braden.
Okay, it's an excellent question. I really like, and this is what I talked about, senior housing in the villages. I went and I took the time and I talked to a lot of the neighbors that are right next to that area, okay? And here's what I heard from those neighbors. They like the project. They like the project. They've said, we're more than happy to have that put in, just make it 3 stories. It doesn't have to be 4 stories. So the question you have to ask yourself is, the developers come in, the neighbors are ready to compromise. The developer comes in and says, I need 4 stories, can't do anything less. The neighbors say, let's just do 3, that's reasonable. Okay? So here's what I would tell the developer. You're gonna do 3 stories. If you can't make that work, you gotta show me why you can't make that work. Let's start with a 3-story building, it's reasonable, it's a compromise, and I'm 100% for that.
Thank you. We have a question from Councillor Albright to Councillor Auchincloss. How do you, Jake, balance creating more housing with keeping the neighborhoods green? And when you say green, you mean environmentally. Yeah.
I believe we should be adding housing in our village centers within a 5-minute walking distance of transit, whether that be bus, commuter rail, or the Green Line. I think downtown Newtonville, Newton Center are the appropriate places for housing. I do not support, unequivocally do not support building on any undeveloped land in any of the neighborhoods in the city of Newton. I have already made it clear that, for example, in 4 Corners, where a developer wants to build right behind Whole Foods in basically a forested area, that is entirely inappropriate. We can have the best of both worlds here in Newton. We can have vibrant, walkable village centers with mixed-use development, and then we can have green, bucolic neighborhoods with a single-family, 2-family housing. And I will not support any development on green space in our neighborhoods.
Thank you, Councillor Auchincloss. I think we have time for one of the questions that was submitted by the audience, and this is going to get back to Ward 2 and a subject we've touched on, but your view of the big changes being proposed for Washington Street. We know that there's Washington Place, which is in court now, but is expected to move forward. We have Austin Street on the other side of the pike, expected to break ground in a few months. And this question here says at least 3 big real estate developments along the street. So we're guessing that there's going to be some other proposal put forward by a developer there. What are your thoughts about this, Jake Auchincloss? Yep.
Washington Street right now is not the best that it can be. We can do better on that corridor. I think the future of Washington Street is going to be require 3 parties to work together well. The first is the City Council, the second is the MBTA, and the third are private sector developers. I think it's appropriate for the City Council to upzone certain land near West Newton and Newtonville commuter rail stations. I think in exchange, the developers need to offer significant monies to the MBTA to enhance and renovate the commuter rail stations. And then for their part, the MBTA needs to prioritize those improvements. And all 3 of those sides have something to give and something to gain, and we can work together to do that. And if elected for another term, that would be one of my focus points, would be to be that facilitator between those three different parties, because Washington Street can be so much better than it is right now.
Right?
I think one of the things when we talk about development, as I mentioned earlier, I develop large-scale renewable energy projects, so I have a great deal of familiarity. I think that having that experience on the council, someone that can actually sit down with a developer and actually get through what they're saying and what they mean. We talk about Washington Place and we talk about the developer buying that property. And I'll tell you right now, no developer in their right mind buys a property if they don't know they can make money on it right out of the gate. It's very sophisticated money. They have a lot of money. Investors put money with, in this particular case, Robert Korf, to develop that project. He bought those properties. He knew he could make money at 103 units. He went in, he wanted to go to 160 units. Basically, that basically is a $15 million dump into his pocket of Newton's money, because we're going to end up having to pay for the kids in the schools. Long story short, on Washington, we talk about affordable housing. If we rip out all those affordable houses on Washington Street, we're going in the opposite direction.
And we will conclude this with Councillor Albright.
So it's interesting that you can put your head into your head into the head of Robert Korf and know what he thought, because I certainly couldn't do that. And he did talk about 6 stories, and I told him that the only place 6 stories existed was in his head and nowhere else, because there was no law that allowed that. I mentioned master planning in an earlier question and answer, and I think master planning is where we want to be. I think someone in an earlier ward said that we're extravagantly spending money. Not only are we not extravagantly spending money in this city, but I wish we had more planning staff to do more planning, more master planning in all the villages and the commercial corridors. They can't do everything at once, and it just plods along very slowly. Master planning on the Washington Street corridor will be very important for us to figure out what we want there. It can't do, I agree with Jake, we can do better, but we need to figure out what we want to do there.
All right, we're going to do a lightning round, 30 seconds. Jake wanted to get a point in, then we'll go right down the line, and then we have to wrap this forum.
I need to comment on what Mr. Houston said about paying for the school kids. Number 1, Washington Place net fiscal revenue for the city. Number 2, I welcome kids in Newton schools. The best way a kid gets ahead is by coming to a zip code that can afford to educate him in an exemplary manner. We cannot be a city that turns kids out. Okay, that's not the American dream that we want to embody here in Newton.
Councillor Albright.
So I don't know if folks are aware, but there is a fair housing law that we have to pay attention to, and we cannot discriminate against families. We just simply can't do that. So to say that we don't want any more kids in our schools is crazy and illegal. But sorry, it ran out of my head.
Go ahead. Braden, go ahead and we'll wrap this.
Yeah, and that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying we shouldn't have children in the school. I'm just talking about our budget, and we talk about where kids are going to go. We talked about in some of the earlier debates, we're having problems. Our schools are busting at the seams. And we're having issues educating children, giving them a proper education because they're too crowded into the classrooms. And I've talked consistently throughout this entire campaign about balance, and we need to have a balance. There's a balance between adding affordable housing and meeting the needs of the residents that live here as well. It's not an all or nothing. I feel like to a certain degree, my opponents are saying it seems to be one or the other. I don't think that's the case.
And we're going to give special dispensation to Councillor Albright, who remembered what she was talking about. But Susan, 30 seconds.
That's all
That's
I
it.
need. So the baby boom echo, the children of the baby boom are working their way through the system. And if you look at the enrollment book in the Newton Public Schools, you'll see that in 5 years' time, and even 4 years' time, the enrollment in the public schools is going down in the elementary school level. So I just want everyone to be aware that this charge of an enrollment increase will not last forever.
All right, thank you very much to the candidates in Ward 2, the City Council at large. If the Charter Commission's plan for a 12-member City Council takes effect in 2020, the Council's functions would seem to me are just going to absolutely have to change, because it'll be half as many members. It'll be 12 members. Under this scenario, would you favor turning most land use decisions to an appointed planning commission? And we talked about this, an audience member asked this as well. And I will add, with what would be the elimination of ward-elected councilors, could you envision an expanded role for the neighborhood area councils who have been outstanding in sponsoring this forum today? Right now we have 4 neighborhood area councils, but there was nothing to prevent there from being more of them. So would they have a larger role perhaps in city government? So a 2-part question. Land use decisions, most land use decisions, over to an appointed planning commission. And this could be appointed by the mayor, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, the city council could appoint members as well, however that works out.
There's no such state legislation that I'm aware of.
Would you support turning that over to an appointed planning commission? And could the neighborhood area councils have a role as well? We'll start with Councilor Yates.
Well, first of all, thank you. I'm against the charter. I think it has not been well thought out. I think those 18 months were basically wasted because they never answered the basic question, if it's not broken, don't fix it. And what is broken? Nothing that has come out, I think, addresses any of that. I'm against the charter. I will vote no as a citizen. I did not co-sponsor the home rule, and I will vote against it. As to, I don't think that it's reasonable to give it to the planning board, which has had a hard time of even making quorums over the last 6 months, or to the ZBA. That just doesn't make sense to me, and frankly, I don't think it's allowed under Chapter 40A. So this is the product. The problem is that the functions, the actual work that the city council does has not been analyzed in any thoughtful way by the Charter Commission, many of whom I admire and respect, but collectively, they've not done a good job and their work should be rejected.
Thank you, Councilor Yates. Andrea?
Thank you, and thank you to the area councils for sponsoring this. So, as I understand it, a number of the land use petitions currently before land use are there because our zoning code doesn't fit our current configuration. 85% of our homes do not meet the zoning they currently sit under. And that means that for small dormers and mudrooms and things like that, people have to go through the special permit process. With proper zoning reform, that might mean that the workload of city council would be significantly less. You should know I covered local governments for 25 years for the Citizen, the Tab, the Boston Globe, and most other area cities and towns do not have 24 city councilors doing this kind of business. They function with 5 or with 9, and they do so admirably well.
Councilor Crossley.
Thank you. So I believe the question presumes that the council is in fact reduced, and
Right.
then how would we divide the work?
Right.
And this is one small piece of how we need to address the work of the council in the coming 2 years. Andrea is correct. I'm going to put it a different way. There are only 15 municipalities in the entire state of Massachusetts that have elected to vest the authority of land use decisions in the special permit granting authority in their legislative body. And it is cumbersome in our city that we do this to the degree that we do this. I agree with earlier candidates that the large projects that are before us deserve a lot of attention. They deserve a lot of deliberation and thoughtful analysis to make sure that these projects are benefiting the common good. But there are a huge raft of small petitions that are before us. The residential petitions could be handled by others.
We're going to allow a follow-up on this. We are going to start with Councilor Yates.
Thank you.
And then we'll allow Andrea and Deb to respond. And then we'll move on.
I think Andrea's right, but that's about that many, I think it's 65%, 85% of our properties are not correctly zoned and therefore doing anything to them
theoretically would require a special permit of some sort. But that's a function of the zoning not being done right. That's not a function of how it should be put out. That basically, of those 15 communities, or whatever it is, I'm sure Deb is right, I think Newton is the best. That Newton, until this year, Newton was listed by several national sources, the fourth best place to live in the country. And I think part of that, maybe not all, maybe only a small part of that, may be due to having an accountable, responsive body doing, being the zoning special permit. Recently it was said, oh, let's follow the model of Everett. With all due respect to our neighbors in Everett, I don't think anyone wants to swap places with Everett.
Councillor Crossley.
Well, so I guess I'll add to it, but I think that a smaller body will be more effective in deliberating land use petitions. One difficulty with a 24-member council where we have only 8 members sitting on any one committee is, and it's particularly true of the land use decision-making process, we hold our land use committee meetings on Tuesday nights so that all of the rest of the council can attend, and they don't. And so, sometimes you do. So, but really, truthfully, most of the time, and I'm not trying to demean anyone's intentions or abilities, but it is, we have a lot of things before us at the same time. People have families and other things to do in the evening and so forth. I get that. But the large land use petitions that are before us deserve everyone's attention at the same time. Controversial projects that are before us of any flavor deserve everyone's attention at the same time. Our deliberative process should be one where everyone is looking at the same set of facts at the same time, hearing the public comment, all of us together, so that our deliberations are fairly heard.
Okay. Andrea?
And so one thing we didn't address in your question was about the role of area councils.
Right.
And as a sitting Waban area councilor, I have to say the area councils are exceptionally good. One of the reasons I wanted to join the Waban Area Council is that they're exceptionally good at education and outreach and at building neighborhood consensus. An already proposed development, not as helpful, because when we get into reaction mode, it's a lot harder to do the education and outreach. It's much simpler to come out ahead of it and do planning and do visioning and do education, which we've done successfully with the Waban Area Council around traffic and safety.
Okay. Next, back to development. And this is in Ward 5. This is the Northland project, which we've discussed here with the other candidates. A major proposal, about 30 acres. Northland initially said 1,000 units, or just under, near 950. What do you think of this vision? And I think all of us realize it's not going to be 900 or probably even 800. But they're going to propose something large, something that's needed, because anyone who's ever been back behind there it's desolate. But on the other hand, there is no public transportation to speak of there. What do you think of is going to be the right mix when you start to deliberate this? Should you all be elected, or should the two of you that are going to be elected and serve next year? What do you think is the right mix? We'll let Brian go ahead.
Well, first of all, there is public transit there. The bus route 59, Needham-Watertown, 1 out of 3 of its buses does go down the Needham Street corridor. They wanted to flip it and go to 2 out of 3 going down that corridor, and I blocked it because I thought keeping transit in Upper Falls and the Highlands was important. The neighborhood area council, and I dearly love you all, from Upper Falls met with the developer, and the consensus was don't put the cars onto Oak Street. And the developer's opinion is, oh, we got to put the cars onto Oak Street and close off the driveway down near behind into 165 Oak Street because, well, it'll just screw up the reallocation of the spaces there. Well, I don't think that's acceptable. And I think that if you want to deal with the transportation problems there, one thing, they point to a community square site. It'd also be a nice site for a school where all the kids from Upper Falls could go to one school. Kids from down...
we can go back to that because that's a big issue, but let's let Councilor Crossley respond to. There isn't the type of public transportation there that you even have in Newtonville with the commuter rail, or certainly Newton Center with the Green Line. What are your thoughts heading into what is probably going to be a pretty spirited debate next year about that Northland project when they do submit it?
So the question is, given our concerns about transit access to this 28 acres on one side of Needham Street and several more acres on the other side, what's the right mix of development? And the honest answer is we don't know. And we've told the developer that. I think basically the developer has gotten our attention. And he's gotten our attention in a good way in that they've illustrated a site plan that does a number of things. Frankly, the Upper Falls neighborhoods are very interested in the way this project successfully addresses Upper Falls and allows for a lot of through traffic and pedestrian-friendly environments for the Upper Falls. We're all concerned about the traffic, though, in my 15 seconds. I want to say we pushed back on the developer, and we are engaged in an in-house analysis of our transportation options and looking at what the developer can do to enhance those.
We're going to go through this, but we're going to complete this first round. We'll do a second round on this as well, a follow-up. But go ahead, Andrea.
I would agree with Deb that we don't know the proper mix yet, but that by right, the owner of the property, it is private property, can make the entire thing offices. And when you think about everybody arriving at between 8, 9, 10 o'clock in the morning and everybody leaving in the evening, that is a real problem. And it's been shown in other cities and in other areas that when you mix up the uses, you can actually reduce traffic. Because if you can walk downstairs to your office or do your shopping in the place where you live, it's the old model of village centers. It actually works.
All right. Councilor Yates, you were getting into the weeds a little bit about the bus routes and where they were going to go. Explain. Go ahead. You needed more time, so let's give you another minute to explain this.
Well, actually, I was concerned about the density of development and where the traffic would go. That the one thing that was unequivocal at the meeting with the Upper Falls Neighborhood Area Council was don't put it out onto Oak Street. And that was one thing that they're absolutely inclined to do. And right now, what is their use of right? It's for a use that they don't think they can fill, which I think they're probably right. And they cite the example of the development on Waltham, downtown Waltham, across from City Hall. And I drive by there on occasion, and the only thing I notice that's most interesting is there's no retail in their ground floors. Their ground floor retail is totally vacant. And when you think of the vacancies that are otherwise, I have a feeling that that whole model doesn't work as well as it should. I agree with Andrea that we did have a very good model in Newton for upper scale. Some of those people back in the Depression took down their second and third stories because they couldn't get any revenue from them. I think the time is to put those back where they were.
Councilor Crossley.
What would you like me to address? The transportation?
And the routing the traffic out onto Oak Street and the issues that would create.
Is this on? What we're looking at now are opportunities. What the city staff is looking at right now are what are the opportunities for developing transportation networks. The city's looking at a study area. It's not enough to look at this one site. This site, whatever we put there, is potentially going to have a very large impact on a much larger area. So we need to be looking at the entirety of the Needham Street corridor and the villages and the neighborhoods that it touches. And that's what we're about to do. It's very preliminary for us to be standing up here and saying anything about any particular aspect of the project and how it's going to work best, because we don't know what the impacts are going to be in total yet. And there are opportunities for redressing some of the transportation options. We have to see how far we can get.
Okay, Andrea?
And again, what would you like me specifically to
In
address here?
terms of dealing with what is likely going to be a situation where you have multiple cars on an already congested street, and what the city's strategy can be going forward to mitigate that, knowing that something's going back there and it's likely to include some residential.
I don't see residential as necessarily entailing traffic.
Both.
But when you have a lot of use going into an area, you will have people needing to get in and out of that area, and that will, that is something we are going to have to address very carefully. It will need a larger study. It will not be something that you can, at this speculative stage, really talk that much about. Yes, Needham Street is very congested. One reason is because there is really, if you're not driving down it, you're not getting down it. Walking is very unpleasant. Biking is unsafe. So, and we don't have a lot in the way of mass transit.
All right. Let's move on to the next subject, which is senior citizens and meeting their needs, specifically the seniors and the senior center. What do you think? Are we doing enough? We'll start with Councilor Crosley. Is there a need for a new senior center? Are there need for expanded staff and services? Fastest growing segment of our population here in Newton.
No, we're not doing enough. And yes to all of the other questions. Our senior population, as was said earlier, is growing very quickly. I think you got a statistic about the over 80 segment growing the fastest growing demographic, but also if the over 60 segment is in not too many years going to be about 30% of our community, of our population. The senior center is in rough shape. We need to start paying attention just to that building, but also it's not big enough to house the breadth and scope of services that we ought to be providing to our senior citizens. We did finally, after many years of resistance, pass that accessory apartment ordinance, which will help several hundred families, including seniors, just by providing that option within their homes. I think if you don't vote for the housing projects that we have deliberated so many years, so many months and years to bring to completion that will serve seniors, I don't think how you can say, I don't know how you can say that you're supporting seniors, because that is one type of housing that's going to help.
How would you respond to that, Councilor Yates? And are we doing enough, number one? And also what Deb was saying, that you're not supporting seniors by not voting in favor of these mixed-use developments, which I'm guessing you're referring to Austin Street, Washington Place, etc.
Well, I think the people who have the worst housing situations that are seniors are living in their longtime family homes, and it is becoming increasingly difficult financially and logistically for them to upkeep their homes. I know of one older single woman who can't get her trash cans out without help. I know of other people who just can't get themselves out of the housing that they're living in because of the steepness of stairs. And I think several of the programs that exist are very difficult to figure out and how do you apply to. I think the water sewer tax relief, it sounds like a great thing, but the details are very difficult. I think you need to have more outreach, both in terms of doing chore service for seniors and for helping them to apply for what we've got and adding to them. And I don't think that if you tear down houses where seniors and other low-income people live, and put up no more units, that you are helping anybody. You're basically running in place.
Thank you. Andrea?
So, no, we aren't doing enough. And yes, the senior center is going to need some serious attention, perhaps a new building, and I support that. It is important for all of us as we get older to have places to live where we can be mobile and to remain in the communities where we raised our kids and where we have connections. And I would not want to face what I've seen a number of my good friends have to face, which is to move out of Newton because they cannot find single floor living, elevator living, places in village centers where they can be independent as they age. And I suggest that we are going to have to build that. We don't have diversity of housing yet.
All right. We'll move on to the next question. I asked this of the Ward 2 at-large candidates. Recreational marijuana sales is something that the City Council is probably going to be taking a look at next year. Councilor Yates, what are your thoughts on this? Would you favor a pot shop in Ward 5?
Well, I was heavily involved in the medical marijuana and in basically following the state's proposed policies and procedures, and all I got for it was a feeling from marijuana advocates that I was standing in their way. I think the basic model would probably be something like liquor, regulating it that way. But frankly, I will look forward to Dr. Schwartz from Ward 6's input on this topic, because I don't want to talk about it.
Councilor Crossley, would you talk about this?
I don't want to talk about it either, but you're asking us the question.
Oh, yeah.
I'm not sure that this isn't something that should be regulated as alcohol is regulated, and that we ought to be looking at those kinds of regulations, not trying to prohibit it in our community. But I think, as was earlier said, the voters voted in the city of Newton strongly in favor of legalizing marijuana, and that's a fact. So that's not something that I would sit here and say that I would undo. Rather, I'd like a lot more information, possibly a citizen's petition, but I don't know that we have the laws to support our undoing that. And I do believe I understand that the state is going to look at the communities that voted in favor of this as locations for these stores.
Andrea?
So you may not know, my daughter went to Reed College in Portland, Oregon, where pot is legal and sold on street corners, and the sky has yet to fall in Portland, Oregon. I think it does need to be carefully regulated, but there's a lot more I'd want to know about how to implement that in Newton and where to put shops that do sell pot legally.
All right. Next question. We're a great city. We have beautiful homes. We have good schools. And we're safe. But we're not perfect. Andrea, what's the city of Newton's biggest weakness?
I would agree with some of the earlier candidates. Our unfunded liabilities, the state of our roads, which is basically our borrowing against our road infrastructure, our buildings that badly need renovation, and the pension liability and the unfunded health obligations that we made a promise to our employees that we would pay for their health insurance until retirement. And we have to do it, and we have to fund it.
Councilor Yates?
I would think they pay for it after retirement. That's going to be the big problem. But in terms of our weakness, our lack of familiarity, that there are a lot of people in the world who aren't as well off as most of our residents are, and that some of them are living in the city, and that their needs need to be taken into account. One other thing I think is that we have undone the work of 100 years ago when schools like this one were built in village centers where they were central and where most of the population could walk to them. Now we are obliged, because of short-sighted decisions of 20 years ago, we have to haul a lot of our kids to badly located schools at great expense to the city, which will never end, or great inconvenience to parents. That's a hard thing to undo, but I'd like to welcome everyone here to the Albert Ainger School, and please note the exhibit about Lieutenant Ainger, who was the only veteran commemorated on any of our public buildings. Councilor Crosler.
Thank you. Well, I like Andrea's answer in that I think one of the hardest struggles we're going to have as a city council, as always, is balancing our limited resources where we need to invest heavily in additional infrastructure. The roads are a great example. We're just barely getting started with our roadway improvement plan. And work that needs still to be done on our buildings, and infrastructure is a big word. It could apply to a lot of things, while we are aggressively paying down that liability. However, the other big weakness we have is our ability to talk about these things, and to talk about planning, and to talk about a lot of the sticky issues that are in front of us. I think one of the biggest challenges we have as a community is that we need to learn how to talk to one another in a constructive, collaborative way so that we can move ahead on some of the thorniest problems that face us.
Okay. You know what, this question comes to mind, and I think Councilor Yates touched upon this, but Ward 5, Upper Falls, and we're talking about a space crunch for our schools because of a decision that was made by Mayor Mann many years ago to close down Warren. Specifically, Emerson cannot be utilized as a school because of state legislation. I'm not exactly sure of all the details, but there's a restriction. It can't be developed.
Own it. People own condos in it.
Can we get somewhere in Upper Falls, an elementary school, that would take the pressure off of specifically countryside?
Yes, I think that's absolutely the right thing to do, and I think the first place to look would be in Northland's properties. I mean, they talk about, oh, we're going to have village streets and all the amenities of a proper village center. Well, one of those amenities of a proper village center is a school. You put it there, and instead of some kids in Upper Falls, 3 kids in 3 adjacent houses going to 3 schools with all the inconvenience and expense, that if you put a school down there as part of that development, then you've cut down the traffic and you've helped to re-knit a whole bunch of things together. But you look at some of the planning here, and I agree that we should have planning, but you look at the pattern book and it splits Upper Falls down the middle on the Greenway, and then throws the rest of Upper Falls in with the portion of Waban going out to the Green Line.
All right.
So if that simple part of the pattern book is screwed up, I'm just afraid what else there is. And I'm very suspicious of the zoning reform thing. I think there are a lot of issues that need to be dealt with there, and I'm not sure that those consultants are prepared to deal with it.
We are going to ask Councilor Crosley and then Andrea Downs the idea of Northland building an elementary school in that property behind Marshall's. Is this something that you think is... Go ahead.
In place of Marshall's.
In place of, okay.
The whole strip there is going.
Right. Right. The whole area.
Behind Marshall's.
Right.
Marshall building is going.
We understand that, so is TJ Maxx across the street. In that property that Northland owns, is it feasible or a good idea to build an elementary school?
Can I take my turn now?
Go ahead.
I don't know the answer to this question. Certainly, part of what we have to look at extremely carefully as this Northland project evolves in concept is, you know, how is the city of Newton going to supply the services necessary to whatever that mix is going to be? And I'll turn, on the other hand, we might determine that we can't have as many housing units as what are being proposed. We don't know that yet, so I think it's too early to say that we should, and I don't know how this works. I don't know how you hold a private developer who owns privately holds land accountable for building a school. I mean, the city would really have to purchase the land from that developer, so I'm not sure this is a realistic concept. But I will say that as chair of public facilities, I have spent an enormous amount of time looking at, and I look forward to doing more, you know, what the future of our school system is across the city. You know, the elementary school population, as I think it was mentioned, is on a downturn. It's stable now, it's on a downturn, and yet we still have a lot of school work that we need to do, and we have to look at balancing those needs across the city.
All right, Andrea.
So one of the things I've heard said here at this table, and that I've seen in walking across the city and talking to people at their front doors, is that we have a certain amount of diversity of income. In fact, we have quite a few people who are struggling to stay here. So incurring the additional expense of a whole nother school, another principal, another gym teacher, another art teacher, all of this is a hard thing to ask people to do. It's far more expensive than buses. And yet I feel the pain of neighborhoods like Upper Falls, where I did knock on houses, where one family had kids at Ager, the next family had kids at Service, and the third family, all in the same block, next door to each other, went to Countryside. And that's a very hard thing for a neighborhood, and I feel that.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. All right, we're going to turn to the questions candidate to candidate. This question is from Councillor Crossley to Andrea Downs. Describe how your background and particular expertise, Andrea, would inform City Council before key decisions have to be acted upon, I think is what you were asking.
Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay. So you may know I've reported for various outlets for 25 years as a community reporter. And those are skills along with extensive volunteer work with the League of Women Voters that have determined my approach to most issues, which is to study, to ask a lot of questions, to listen to a lot of people, and then come up with what are the most viable solutions based on the facts. And that's the approach I would take that's the approach I have taken with Waban Area Council. That is the approach I would take with City Council.
All right. This question is from Andrea to Councillor Brian Yates. Councillor Yates, what are the top 3 issues facing Newton, and what are your proposals to deal with them successfully?
Overdevelopment, preservation of villages, and protection of the environment. Protection of the environment, I think we should ask Boston College to donate the Webster Woods to the city in view of the amount of services that they've gotten from the city. And as a Boston College alumnus, I would be happy to participate in that request. In the preservation of the villages, we do need to do zoning redesign, but we need to do zoning redesign very carefully. That I've proposed an item before the Zoning and Planning Committee, not taken up as yet, that would say that we should have new districts that would allow existing land uses, smaller lots, to be conforming, and that therefore there would be less of an incentive for them to be torn down or removed because they don't conform to that goes to overdevelopment as well. And please visit my website, and I've got answers to all of these there.
All right, final question. This is from Councilor Yates to Councilor Crossley. Why did you say in a candidate questionnaire that the city is not in compliance with Chapter 40B Affordable Housing Law when the ZBA, the Planning and Law Departments disagree and believe that the city has met the 1.5% standard of affordable housing on developable land? And I might add that the state's alphabet soup organizations have disagreed, so there doesn't seem to be, it hasn't gone to courts yet, so there seems to be a disagreement on whether the city is in compliance or not. Tell us why you think it's not in compliance.
As a city councilor, I'm an architect, so it's not usual for me to be reading a lot of legal documents. And as a city councilor, we wind up having to read quite a few legal documents. And oftentimes I read them 5 times before I realize, these really don't make sense, actually. In fact, they don't make sense. But the brief that was prepared describing what the rules are for calculating what properties may be included in the land area that is potentially developable, and what property may be included as that which contains affordable housing, and that was sent back to us by the Housing Appeals Court, who disagrees, who twice ruled that Newton is wrong, was crystal clear. So I read those documents. They made complete mathematical sense to me, and I think the city's on the wrong course, and everyone from the Zoning Board of Appeals does not agree that we're in the right place.
All right. I want to thank the candidates for Ward 5, City Councilor at Large, City Councilor Brian Yates, City Councilor Deb Crossley, and we also have Andrea Downs. Thank you so much. Thank you to the Neighborhood Area Council for sponsoring the forum.